from a plane that plummeted into the middle of the city and was recorded by everyone. A plane crashed into a river and was recorded by a pilot. Even a plane that hovered in the air for a few seconds before crashing to Earth. All these accidents have something in common. In a matter of seconds, a normal flight turned into a horror story. Today, you'll see top 7 plane moments that turned into pure terror in seconds. If you watch this video, Happy New Year. Don't forget to wish everyone success in the comments. Now, let's begin with an accident that happened right in the middle of a town. The Cuban Airlines Flight 972 crash. On May 18, 2018, Cubana de Aviación Flight 972 prepared for departure from José Martí International Airport in Havana, Cuba. The Boeing 737-200 was operating a domestic flight to Holguín, carrying more than 110 passengers and crew. From the outside, everything looked routine. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, passengers felt the familiar push of takeoff. Moments later, the plane lifted into the air, but something was wrong. Almost immediately after liftoff, the aircraft began to lose altitude. Instead of climbing, the Boeing 737 struggled to stay airborne. Witnesses on the ground watched in horror as the plane wobbled, banking sharply while barely clearing buildings beyond the runway. Inside the cabin, panic erupted. The aircraft rolled violently to the right, then to the left. Passengers screamed as the plane descended uncontrollably just seconds after takeoff. Less than 1 minute after leaving the ground, Flight 972 slammed into a field near the airport perimeter. The impact was devastating. The aircraft broke apart and erupted into flames, sending a massive plume of black smoke into the sky. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but the destruction was overwhelming. Out of everyone on board, only a handful survived the initial impact, many with critical injuries. What should have been a short domestic flight turned into one of the deadliest aviation disasters in Cuba's modern history, unfolding in full view of the airport it had just departed. The investigation into Flight 972 quickly focused on the moments before takeoff. The aircraft involved was more than 40 years old and had been leased from a foreign company, along with its crew. While age alone does not cause accidents, investigators knew they had to examine every detail carefully. Flight data revealed a critical problem during takeoff. The aircraft's weight and balance were severely miscalculated. Investigators found that the plane was significantly heavier than expected, and worse, the weight was improperly distributed. This caused the aircraft's center of gravity to shift dangerously far aft. When the pilots rotated for takeoff, the aircraft pitched up too aggressively, losing airspeed almost immediately. With insufficient lift and unstable control, the plane entered an unrecoverable situation just seconds after leaving the runway. There was no evidence of engine failure, sabotage, or weather-related issues. The engines were producing power, but the aircraft was simply too heavy and poorly balanced to fly safely. The investigation also raised concerns about operational oversight, including load calculations, documentation, and coordination between the leasing company and the airline. Flight 972 exposed how a simple but critical error on the ground can doom an aircraft before it ever reaches altitude. The tragedy led to renewed scrutiny of leasing practices, crew coordination, and weight and balance procedures, reminding the aviation world that even in the age of advanced technology, basic fundamentals remain a matter of life and death. If you think this accident was chaotic, the next one caused shock in the United States. Because when a plane was flying calmly, in seconds it ended up crashing to the ground. We are talking about National Airlines Flight 102. The morning at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan was calm, quiet, and routine, until the enormous Boeing 747-400 cargo jet of National Airlines Flight 102 began its takeoff roll. Loaded with multiple mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, Each weighing over 12 tons, the aircraft was carrying one of the heaviest and most dangerous cargo types in aviation. The 747 accelerated powerfully, lifting off the runway just like hundreds of cargo flights before it. But only seconds into the climb, something was terribly wrong. Soldiers and ground crew near the runway immediately noticed the aircraft pitching sharply upward, far steeper than normal. The massive jet looked as if it were clawing at the sky, fighting a battle it couldn't win. Inside the cockpit, the crew suddenly felt the impossible. The aircraft was no longer controllable. A violent shift in weight had thrown the jet completely off balance. One of the armored vehicles in the cargo hold had broken loose during takeoff, tearing through restraint straps and smashing through the bulkhead. The sudden 12-ton weight shift forced the aircraft's nose up, sending it into a near-stall attitude from which recovery was impossible. From the ground, a dashcam captured the horrifying moment as the aircraft climbed steeply, hung motionless in the air for a split second, then rolled to the right. For a brief moment, it seemed frozen. Then gravity took over. The giant 747 slammed nose first into the ground just beyond the runway and exploded into a massive fireball. The force of the impact sent debris flying in every direction as a towering column of smoke rose into the sky. The tragedy was instantaneous. All 7 crew members on board lost their lives in a matter of seconds. Investigations later confirmed the cause: improper cargo restraint. The armored vehicles, each weighing more than a small bus, were not secured according to required standards. When they shifted during takeoff, they punctured the aircraft's hydraulic systems, severed control cables, and caused a catastrophic loss of control. The jet was essentially doomed the moment it left the ground. Flight 102 became a chilling reminder that in cargo aviation, weight doesn't just matter. Securement can be the thin line between a safe flight and a fatal disaster. And the fact that every second of this tragedy was captured on video makes it one of the most shocking aviation accidents ever recorded. But sometimes there are accidents that become terrifying. But luckily there are no fatalities, and they remain as a terrifying anecdote. Like the Latam Airlines flight LA-800. On March 11, 2024, Latam Airlines flight LA-800 was cruising at 41,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. The Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner was flying from Sydney to Auckland, carrying more than 260 passengers and crew. For most on board, it was a calm flight. Quiet cabin, dimmed lights, people resting. Then, without warning, the aircraft suddenly pitched downward. In a matter of seconds, the plane experienced a violent drop. Passengers who were not wearing seatbelts were thrown upward, slamming into the cabin ceiling before crashing back onto their seats and the floor. Overhead bins burst open, food carts flew, and screams filled the cabin. Several passengers hit the ceiling so hard that they were injured instantly. Crew members were knocked off their feet as the aircraft continued to jolt violently. Inside the cockpit, the sudden movement shocked even the pilots. Oxygen masks did not deploy, but panic spread rapidly. Blood was visible in the aisles. Some passengers were unconscious. Others were crying, convinced the plane was about to crash. The pilots quickly regained control and stabilized the aircraft, but the damage inside the cabin was severe. Dozens of people were injured, some seriously, with head, neck, and spinal injuries. Flight LA-800 declared an emergency and diverted to Auckland, landing with emergency vehicles waiting on the runway. What had been a routine international flight turned into a traumatic event that would make headlines around the world. Initial confusion surrounded what caused such a violent incident at cruising altitude. Early speculation focused on turbulence, but investigators soon realized something didn't add up. The aircraft's data showed no severe weather in the area at the time of the incident. Attention then shifted to the aircraft itself. Investigators discovered that the Boeing 787 experienced a sudden uncommanded pitch movement, meaning the aircraft briefly pushed itself downward without pilot input. This movement created a rapid negative G-force, causing passengers and crew to become momentarily weightless. Further investigation revealed that the issue may have been linked to a faulty cockpit seat mechanism. Reports indicated that a pilot's seat may have unintentionally moved forward, applying pressure to the control column and forcing the aircraft into a sudden dive. This raised serious concerns. If confirmed, it meant that a mechanical seat malfunction, not weather or pilot error, nearly caused a catastrophic loss of control. Boeing and aviation authorities immediately began reviewing cockpit seat designs and maintenance procedures across the global 787 fleet. Airlines were instructed to inspect seats and reinforce checks before flight. The incident also reignited discussions about seatbelt use during cruise, as most injuries occurred to passengers who were not restrained at the moment of the drop. Flight LA-800 became a chilling reminder that modern aircraft are not only vulnerable to weather, but also to unexpected technical failures inside the cockpit. Failures that can turn calm skies into chaos in seconds. But although there were accidents in this case, not all of them end with a happy ending. The one you're about to see? Everything was going well until the plane lost control and crashed into the sea. We're talking about Alaska Airlines Flight 261.
Center Alaska 261, we are in a dive here. But we've lost vertical control of our airplane.
The Alaska Airlines MD-83 zooms over the California coast. It's a routine, calm flight, like hundreds that take off and land every day. But suddenly, a metallic explosion rocks the plane. The aircraft plummets, passengers scream, and in the cockpit, the pilots struggle with unresponsive controls. The plane plummets violently, as if dragged into the Pacific Ocean. The seconds seem endless, and when everything indicates there's no way out, the pilots achieve the impossible: stabilize it. The momentary silence in the cockpit is mistaken for hope, for the idea that the worst is over. But that calm is merely a cruel deception, because just moments later, the plane loses control again, tilting dramatically. Now, the battle seems impossible to win. What was supposed to be an ordinary flight between Puerto Vallarta and San Francisco would end up becoming one of the most shocking tragedies in the history of modern aviation. And in the next few minutes, you'll find out what really happened inside Alaska Airlines Flight 261. It was the afternoon of January 31st, 2000. Alaska Airlines Flight 261, a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, was preparing to take off from Puerto Vallarta, bound for San Francisco. A total of 88 people were on board. For all of them, it was an ordinary flight, but in just a few minutes, it would turn into an unforgettable nightmare. In the cockpit were Captain Ted Thompson, with more than 17,000 flight hours, and First Officer Bill Tansky, with almost 9,000. Two experienced pilots, respected for their professionalism. No one could have imagined they would be tested in a way they had never faced before. The initial atmosphere was that of any vacation trip. Children playing, couples resting, families eager to return home. Everything seemed calm, but that calm was deceptive. The plane was already carrying a hidden problem, one that had been reported some time ago and that afternoon was about to manifest itself in the worst way. It was the horizontal stabilizer, a critical component that keeps the plane level in flight. Without it, controlling the aircraft would be virtually impossible. And just as the MD-83 was gaining altitude, the pilots would begin to sense that something was wrong. Mid-climb, the pilots feel something unsettling. The controls feel stiff, heavy, almost locked. It's not turbulence. It's the horizontal stabilizer, the part that keeps the plane level. Suddenly, the MD-83 pitches sharply downward. The captain and first officer pull with all their might to regain control. It's like fighting an invisible giant. From the ground, the engineers try to give instructions, but nothing seems to work. Every second, the plane's response worsens, and the crew already knows. If that stabilizer fails completely, there will be no way to control the plane. Suddenly, the stabilizer gives way. The plane plummets, as if it had lost its wings. Passengers are thrown against their seatbelts, drinks fly through the air, and screams fill the cockpit. In the cockpit, the pilots struggle with superhuman strength. The MD-83 plummets hundreds of meters in seconds, and all seems lost. But against all odds, they manage to stabilize it. The relief lasts only a moment, because everyone in the cockpit knows the fault is not resolved, and the next crash could be the last. For a moment, the plane seems to respond, but suddenly the stabilizer fails again. The MD-83 pitches down brutally, entering a second, even more violent dive. The pilots struggle, shout instructions, and try everything they can. The controls no longer respond. Every movement is useless. The plane spins, pitches, and begins to descend uncontrollably. And in that moment, everyone understands the truth. This is the final battle.
The Alaska Airlines MD-83 is no longer responding. The cockpit is in chaos. The plane enters a final dive, descending at a speed impossible to control. The passengers feel gravity pulling them down, objects flying, and the sensation is that of an inevitable abyss. Outside, the blue Pacific sky contrasts with the desperation within. In the cockpit, Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky continue fighting until the last second. They don't give up. Even though they know the aircraft is beyond recovery, their instinct is to keep fighting for every life on board. At 4:22 p.m., the plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean, about 4 kilometers off the coast of California. There were no survivors. And what you're about to hear is even more shocking: the actual audio from the black box of this flight. An authentic record of the last moments in the cockpit. Warning, discretion advised.
Feel that?
Yeah, okay, give me slats. This is a bit. Is it? Yeah. Mayday! Okay, we are inverted. Now we gotta get it up. Push the blue side up. Okay, let's kick rudder. Left rudder. Left rudder. Okay, right rudder. Right rudder. Okay. We gotta get it over again. At least upside down we're flying. Speed brake. Got it.
After months of analysis, the NTSB revealed the truth. The accident was not an aerial mystery, but a maintenance failure. The jack screw, an essential screw that moves the horizontal stabilizer, was worn due to lack of lubrication. A tiny part forgotten in the protocols had doomed Flight 261. The investigations pointed the finger at Alaska Airlines for negligence in its maintenance practices, and the tragedy forced the industry to strengthen safety controls so that something like this would never happen again. Flight 261 will be remembered for the tragedy, but also for the bravery of its pilots who fought until the last moment. The investigation left a clear lesson. In aviation, a single maintenance detail can mean the difference between life and death. Today, every time a plane takes off, it does so with stricter protocols, in memory of those who lost their lives on January 31st, 2000. And although this last accident involved a crash into the sea, the next one crashed into a frozen mountain where professional mountaineers had to search for traces of human life. We are talking about Air New Zealand Airlines Flight 901. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 departed for what was supposed to be a breathtaking sightseeing journey over Antarctica. The DC-10 carried 257 people, passengers and crew, most of them expecting a once-in-a-lifetime view of ice, mountains, and endless white landscapes. As the aircraft descended through cloud cover to give passengers a closer look, the crew believed they were flying over flat sea ice. Instead, directly ahead of them, hidden by cloud and visual illusion, stood Mount Erebus, one of Antarctica's most dangerous volcanoes. With visibility reduced and no visual contrast between snow, sky, and mountain, the pilots never saw the terrain rising in front of them. At 12:49 p.m., Flight 901 slammed into the slopes of Mount Erebus at high speed. The impact was instant and unsurvivable. All 257 people on board were killed, making it the deadliest accident in New Zealand's aviation history. What was meant to be a scenic flight ended in total devastation in one of the most remote places on Earth. The investigation uncovered a chain of critical errors. Before the flight, the aircraft's navigation coordinates had been changed without the flight crew being informed. This small data shift altered the flight path by several miles, placing the aircraft directly on a collision course with Mount Erebus. At the same time, a dangerous phenomenon called whiteout eliminated depth perception. The crew believed they were flying over level terrain, when in reality, they were descending toward a mountain hidden in plain sight. Air New Zealand initially blamed pilot error, but later investigations revealed deeper organizational failures, including poor communication, flawed procedures, and the lack of proper warnings about the risks of low-altitude flying in Antarctica. Flight 901 became a landmark case in aviation history, proving that accidents aren't always caused by a single mistake, but by silent decisions made long before the aircraft ever takes off. But if you think that last accident was chaotic, the next one was going well. The plane had even landed and suddenly crashed in the middle of the runway, creating a major accident. We're talking about Japan Airlines Flight 516. On January 2, 2024, Japan Airlines Flight 516 was completing its final approach into Tokyo's Haneda Airport after a domestic flight from Sapporo. The aircraft, an Airbus A350 carrying nearly 400 passengers and crew, was landing during the busy New Year holiday period. As the jet touched down on the runway, everything appeared normal for just a split second. Then, without warning, a violent impact shook the aircraft. The A350 had collided with a Japan Coast Guard turboprop that was positioned on the runway. Almost instantly, flames erupted beneath the fuselage. Fire spread rapidly as the aircraft continued rolling, trailing sparks and burning fuel. Inside the cabin, smoke filled the air as alarms sounded and passengers realized something was terribly wrong. Despite the growing fire, the cabin crew acted with extreme precision.
Emergency slides were deployed, and passengers were ordered to evacuate immediately. Within minutes, hundreds of people escaped onto the runway as the aircraft became fully engulfed in flames. Miraculously, every passenger and crew member on Flight 516 survived. The A350 burned almost completely, collapsing into a charred shell as firefighters battled the blaze. The dramatic footage of the burning aircraft quickly spread worldwide, stunning viewers who had never seen such a large, modern airliner consumed by fire, with everyone still alive. The investigation revealed that the accident was not caused by a technical failure of the passenger aircraft, but by a breakdown in runway coordination and communication. The Coast Guard aircraft had entered or remained on the runway without proper clearance while Flight 516 was cleared to land. Contributing factors included miscommunication between air traffic control and the Coast Guard crew, confusion during nighttime operations, and the intense workload associated with holiday traffic. The Coast Guard aircraft was preparing for a humanitarian mission following an earthquake, adding urgency and complexity to the situation. Despite the tragedy for the Coast Guard crew, the survival of everyone aboard Flight 516 highlighted major advances in aviation safety. The A350's fire-resistant materials, improved evacuation procedures, and the crew's strict adherence to training all played a critical role. Japan Airlines Flight 516 became a powerful case study, proving that while accidents can still happen on the ground, modern aircraft design and disciplined crew response can turn what should have been a mass casualty disaster into a story of survival. And finally, I want to mention an accident that occurred due to human error and a lack of communication, when a plane about to take off was not informed that there was a fire truck on the ground. We are talking about Latam Peru Flight 2213. On November 18, 2022, Latam Peru Flight 2213 prepared for takeoff from Jorge Chávez International Airport in Lima. The Airbus A320 was bound for Juliaca, carrying passengers who expected a routine domestic flight. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway at high speed, something completely unexpected appeared ahead. A fire truck crossed directly into the aircraft's path. The collision was instant and violent. The right engine struck the emergency vehicle, tearing it apart and sending debris across the runway. Flames erupted immediately as the aircraft slid to a stop. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed as smoke filled the air. The crew initiated an emergency evacuation, deploying slides as firefighters rushed toward the scene, now facing a tragedy involving their own colleagues. All passengers and crew escaped the aircraft alive, but 2 firefighters lost their lives instantly, and another was critically injured. The runway was left covered in wreckage, and the airport shut down completely. Cameras captured the horrifying moment, showing how a normal takeoff turned into chaos in seconds. Investigators later confirmed that the accident was caused by a runway incursion during an authorized emergency drill. Several airport fire vehicles entered the active runway without proper clearance while the aircraft was accelerating for takeoff. Critical communication failures occurred between air traffic control and airport emergency crews. The pilots were never warned of vehicles on the runway, and by the time the fire truck became visible, it was too late to abort safely. The investigation revealed serious flaws in coordination, safety protocols, and risk management during live runway operations. Emergency exercises were allowed to take place while commercial flights were still departing. Latam Peru Flight 2213 became one of the most shocking runway accidents in modern aviation, reminding the world that even on the ground, before leaving the Earth, aviation safety depends on flawless communication. This tragedy forced airports worldwide to reassess how emergency drills are conducted, proving that a single mistake on the runway can be just as deadly as a failure in the sky.